Hi, welcome back to Book Club. We're finishing up Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. We're on chapter 21. That week, my mother went crazy cleaning the house. While I waited for something to happen, I thought it would be a telegram saying they weren't able to come after all. I was sure God only wanted to punish me a little while, not for the whole spring vacation. Cheer up, Margaret, my mother said over dinner. Things are never as bad as they seem. How can you be glad they're coming? I asked. After all the stories you told me about them, how? I wanted to show them how well I've managed for 14 years without their help. And I want them to see my wonderful family. My father said, "You can't expect Margaret to be overjoyed when her plans have been changed at the last minute." "Look, Herb," my mother said, "I haven't forgiven my parents, you know that. I never will, but they're coming. I can't say no. Try to understand, both of you, please." My mother hadn't ever asked me to do that before. Usually it was me asking her to try to understand. My father kissed her on the cheek as she cleared away the dishes. He promised to make the best of it. I promised to. My mother kissed us both and said she had the best family in the world. On April 5th, my mother and I drove to Newark Airport to meet them. My father didn't come. He thought it'd be better if he stayed home and greeted them there. On the way to the airport, my mother briefed me. "Margaret, I'm not trying to make excuses for my mother and father, but I want you to know that your grandparents have their beliefs too. And 14 years ago, well, they did what they thought was right, even though we know it was cruel. Their beliefs were important to them. Am I making any sense to you?" "Some," I said. When they announced the arrival of the flight number 894 from Toledo, I followed my mother to the gate. I knew it was them right away. I knew it by the way they walked down the airplane stairs, clutching each other. And when they got closer, I knew it by my grandmother's shoes, black with laces and fat heels, old lady shoes. My grandfather had white hair around the edges and none on the top. He was shorter and fatter than my grandmother. They looked around a bit before my mother called out, "Here we are, over here." They walked toward us, growing more excited. They recognized my mother. She gave each of them a short hug. I just stood there feeling dumb until my grandmother said, "Anne, this must be Margaret Ann." When she said it, I noticed the cross around her neck. It was the biggest one I've ever saw, and it sparkled. I didn't want them to touch me, and maybe they could tell because my grandmother bent over as if to kiss me, and I stiffened. Didn't mean to, it just happened. I think my mother knew how I felt because she told them we'd better see about the luggage. When we got home, my father met us at our front door and carried in their suitcases. They had two of them, both brown and both new. "Hello, Herb," my grandmother said. "Hello, Mrs. Hutchins," my father answered. I thought how funny it was for my father to call her Mrs. My grandfather shook hands with my father. "You're looking well, Herb," he said. My father pressed his lips together but finally managed to say, "Thank you." I thought, this is harder on my father than it is on me. My mother and I showed my grandparents to their room. Then my mother went down to see about dinner. I said, "If there's anything you need, just ask me." "Thank you, Margaret Ann," my grandmother said. She had a funny way of scrunching up her mouth. "You don't have to call me Margaret Ann," I said. "Nobody does. Just Margaret is fine." My mother really made a fancy dinner, the kind she has when she's entertaining friends, and I'm sent to bed early. We had flowers on the table and hired a lady to wash the dishes. My mother changed into her new dress, and her hair looked nice too. She didn't look like her parents at all. My grandmother changed her dress too, but she still had the cross around her neck. At dinner, we all tried hard to have a conversation. My mother and my Grandmother talked about old friends from Ohio who were doing what these days. My grandfather said mostly, please pass the butter, please pass the salt. Naturally, I used my best possible manners. In the middle of the roast beef course, my grandfather knocked over his water glass and my grandmother gave him a sharp look. But my mother said water couldn't possibly hurt anything. The lady from the kitchen wiped it up. During dessert, my mother explained to my grandparents that she had just ordered all new living room furniture and she's sorry they wouldn't be able to see it. I knew she hadn't ordered anything yet, but I didn't tell. After dinner, we sat around in the den, and my grandfather asked my father such questions as, are you still in the insurance business? My father answered yes. My grandfather said, do you invest in the stock market? Father answered, occasionally. Grandfather, this is a pretty nice house, Father. Thank you. We think so too. While my grandmother talked to my mother about, we were in California over Thanksgiving. Oh, yes, your brother has a wonderful wife. I'm glad. If only they were blessed with a child. You know, they're thinking about adopting. I hope they do. Everyone should have a child to love. My grandmother said, yes, I know. I've always wanted dozens of grandchildren, but Margaret's all I've got. Then my mother excused herself to pay the lady in the kitchen, who signaled that her taxi was waiting out front. So my grandmother turned to me. Do you like school? She asked. Most of the time, I said. Do you get good marks? Pretty good, I said. How do you do in Sunday school? My mother came back into the den. Then I sat down down next to me. Sorry about my dogs in the background. I don't go to Sunday school. I said, you don't? No. Father, that's my grandmother. That's what my grandmother called my grandfather. He called her mother. What is it, Mother? Grandfather said. Margaret doesn't go to Sunday school. Grandmother shook her head and played with her cross. Look, my mother said, trying a smile. You know we don't practice any religion. Here it comes, I thought. I want to leave the room then, but I felt like I was glued to my seat. We hoped by now you change your minds about religion, Grandfather said, especially for Margaret's sake. Grandmother added, a person's got to have a religion. Let's not get into a philosophical discussion. My father said, annoyed. He sent my mother a warning look across the room. Grandfather laughed. I'm not being a philosopher, Herb. Look at my mother. Look, my mother explained. We're letting Margaret choose her own religion when she's grown. If she wants to, my father said defiantly. Nonsense, Grandmother said. A person doesn't choose religion. A person's born to it, Grandfather boomed. Grandmother smiled at last and gave a small laugh. So Margaret is Christian, she announced, like we all should have known. Please, my mother said. Margaret could just as easily be Jewish. Don't you see? If you keep this up, you're going to spoil everything. I don't mean to upset you, dear, Grandmother told my mother, but a child is always the religion of the mother. And you, Barbara, were born Christian. We were baptized. It's that simple. Margaret is nothing, my father stormed, and I'll thank you for ending this discussion right now. I didn't want to listen anymore. How could they talk that way in front of me? Didn't they know I was a real person with feelings of my own? Margaret, Grandmother said, touching my sleeve. It's not too late for you, dear. You're still God's child. Maybe while I'm visiting, I could take you to church and talk to the minister. He might be able to straighten things out. Stop it, I hollered, jumping up. All of you, just stop it. I can't stand another minute of listening to you. Who needs religion? Who? Not me. I don't need it. I don't even need God. I ran out of the den and up to my room. I heard my mother say, why did you have to start? Now you've ruined everything. I was never going to talk to God again. What did he want from me anyway? I was through with him and his religions, and I was never going to set foot in the Y or the Jewish community. Never. Chapter 22. The next morning I stayed in my room. I wouldn't even go down for breakfast. Caught myself starting to say, "Are you there, God?" But I remembered that I wasn't going to talk to him anymore. I wondered if he would strike me down. Well, if he wanted to, that was his business. By afternoon, I couldn't stand being in the house, so I asked my mother to drive me downtown to meet Janie for a movie. My mother agreed that I needed to get away for a few hours. Janie and I met at the drugstore in the corner, across the street from the movie theater. We were 20 minutes early, so we went into the drugstore to look around. Mostly, we liked to inspect the sanitary napkin display. After a few minutes of looking, I whispered to Sorry about that. I whispered to Janie, "Let's buy a box." It was something I thought about for a while, but wasn't even brave enough to do. Today I was feeling brave. I thought, so what if God's mad at me? Who cares? I even tested him by crossing the street in the middle and against that light. Nothing happened. But buy it for what? Janie asked. "Just in case," I told her. "You mean to keep it home?" "Sure, why not?" "I don't know, my mother might not like it," Janie said, "so don't tell her." "But what if she sees it?" "It'll be in a bag. You can say it's school supplies." I said, "Do you have enough money?" "Yes." "Okay, now what kind should we buy?" I asked. "How about teenage softies?" Janie said, "That's the kind Gretchen uses." "Okay." I took a box of teenage softies off the shelf. "Well, go ahead," I said to Janie. "Take yours." Okay, Janie took a box too. I grabbed a purple pocket comb to make it look like we were really shopping. We walked to the checkout counter with our stuff and walked away just as fast when we saw that there was a boy behind the cash register. "I can't go through with it," Janie whispered. She put her box back on the shelf. "I'm scared." "Don't be a dope." What's to be? I was interrupted by a sales lady in a blue doctor's coat. "Can I help you, girls?" she asked. Janie shook her head, but I said, "Well, I'd like these, please." I took Janie's box back off the shelf and showed the sales lady what we selected. "Fine, girls. Take them up to the cash register and Max will wrap them for you." Janie didn't move. She looked like she was cemented to the floor. She had this dumb expression on her face between crying and smiling. So I grabbed her box and headed for Max and the cash register. I plopped everything down in front of him and just stood there, not looking at his face, not saying anything either. He added it all up and I motioned to Janie to give me her money. Then I said, "2 bags, please." Max took my money, gave me some change, which I didn't bother to count, and presented me with 2 brown bags. That was all there was to it. You'd think he sold that kind of stuff every day of the week. When I got home from the movies, my mother said, "What's in the package?" I said, "School supplies." I went to my room with my purchases. I sat down on my bed, staring at the box of teenage softies. I hoped God was watching. Let him see I could get along fine without him. I opened the box and took out one pad. I held it for a long time. Finally, I got up and went into my closet. It was dark in there, especially with the door closed. I wish I had a huge walk-in closet with a light and a lock, but I managed anyways. I stuck the pad in between my legs, then pulled up my underpants. I wanted to find out how it would feel. Now I knew. I liked it. I thought about sleeping with my pad that night, but decided against it. If there was a fire, my secret might be discovered, so I took it out put it back in the box, and hid it in my bottom desk drawer. My mother never checks there because the mess makes her positively sick. The next morning, my grandparents announced they were moving up on to New York. You told me a week, my mother said. You said you were coming for a week. We did say that, my grandfather told her, but we've decided to spend the rest of the week in New York at a hotel. I see, my mother said. My father hid behind his newspaper, but I saw the big smile. All I could think of was that they ruined my trip to Florida, and now they weren't even staying. It wasn't fair. It was really a cheat. When my mother got back from driving them to the bus, my father said, How much do you want to make a bet? It was a trip to New York all the time. They just stopped in to see you because it was convenient. I don't believe that, my mother said. Well, believe it, my father said. They ruined my vacation, I said. Nobody answered me. Chapter 23. That night the doorbell rang at 8. We were in the den. I said I'd see who was there. I opened the door. Grandma, I screamed. I threw my arms around her. What are you doing home? If Mohammed doesn't come to the mountain comes to Mohammed. I laughed, knowing that I was Mohammed and that my grandmother was the mountain. There was a man standing next to Grandma. Grandma turned to him. Morris, she said, this is my Margaret. Then Grandma closed the front door and told me, Margaret, darling, this is Mr. Morris Benjamin. Rhymes with cinnamon, he said to me. I smiled. I guess it's Benjamin instead of Benjamin. Benjamin is his last name. Grandma looked marvelous, very tan and pale blonde. Mr. Benjamin, had a lot of silver hair, a mustache to match, and black-rimmed eyeglasses. He was tan, too. He held Grandma's arm. Where are they? Grandma asked. Mom and Dad are in the den, I said. With your other grandparents? No, they're gone. Gone? Grandma cried. But I thought they were staying all week. We thought so, too, I said. But Morris and I came especially to see them. You did? I said. How come? Grandma said Mr. Benjamin gave each other a secret look. Well, we thought you might need our support. Oh, Grandma, I can manage it just fine by myself. I know you can. You're my Margaret, aren't you? Tell me, did they try anything? Like what? I asked. You know, Grandma said, church business. Well, kind of, I admitted. I knew it, Grandma cried. Didn't I tell you? She asked Mr. Benjamin. Mr. Benjamin shook his head. You had them. You had them pegged right all the time. Sylvia, he said. Just remember, Margaret, no matter what they said, you're a Jewish girl. No, I'm not, I argued. I'm nothing. And you know it. I don't even believe in God. Margaret, Grandma said, don't ever talk like that about God. Why not? I asked. It's true. I wanted to ask God, did he hear that? But I wasn't speaking to him, and I guess he knew it. By that time, my mother and father were in the living room, and Grandma was making the introductions. My parents gave Mr. Benjamin the once-over, and he was pretty busy sizing them up too. Then my mother made coffee and served warm Danish. She offered me some milk and ginger snaps, but I wasn't hungry. I wanted to get out of there, so I yawned very loud without covering my mouth. Margaret, dear, if you're so tired, why don't you just go to bed, Grandma said. I think I will. Good night, everybody. Sometimes Grandma is almost as bad as everybody else. As long as she loves me and I love her, what difference does religion make? Chapter 24. Mr. Bennett announced that our individual reports on our long project would be due next Friday. They wouldn't be graded, so we were to be completely honest and not worry about pleasing him. He hoped we had each learned something of value. On Thursday night, I wrote a letter. May 25th. Dear Mr. Bennett, I have conducted a year-long experiment in religion. I have not come to any conclusions about what religion I wanted to be when I grow up, if I want to be any special religion at all. I have read 3 books on this subject. They are Modern Judaism, A History of Christianity, and Catholicism, past and present. I went to church services all at the First Presbyterian Church of Fairbrook. I went to the United Methodist Church of Fairbrook on Christmas Eve. I attended Temple Israel of New York City on Rosh Hashanah, which is a Jewish holiday. I went to confession at St. Bartholomew Church, but I had to leave the confessional because I didn't know what to say. I have not tried being a Buddhist on a Muslim because I don't know any people of these religions. I have not really enjoyed my religious experiments very much, and I don't think I'll make up my mind one way or the other for a long time. I don't think a person can decide to be a certain religion just like that. It's like having to choose your own name. You think about it for a long time, and then you keep changing your mind. If I should ever have children, I will tell them what religion they are so they can start learning about it at an early age. 12 is very late to learn. Sincerely, Margaret and Simon. On Friday, everybody handed in a thick booklet with a decorated cover. All I had was the letter. I couldn't put that in with the pile of booklets. I was too embarrassed. It looked like I hadn't done any work at all. When the bell rang, I sat at my desk while everyone else filed out of the room. When Mr. Bennett looked up, he said, "Yes, Margaret?" I walked to his desk with my letter. "I didn't hand in a booklet," I said. "Oh, I wrote you a letter instead." I handed it to him, then stood there while he read it. "I really tried, Mr. Bennett. I'm sorry. I wanted to do better. I knew I was about to cry. I couldn't say anything else, so I ran out of the classroom. I got to the girls' room before the tears came. I could still hear Mr. Bennett's calling, "Margaret, Margaret." I didn't pay any attention. I splashed cold water on my face. Then I walked home slowly by myself. What was wrong with me anyway? When I was 11, I hardly ever cried. Now anything and everything could start me bawling. I wanted to talk it over with God, but I wasn't about to let him know that, even though I missed him. Chapter 25, the last chapter. On June 17th, the PTA gave us a farewell party in the gym, and none of the 6th grade girls wore socks. I wore my first pair of sheer stockings and got my first run in them an hour later, and a run is a tear in the hose or stockings. All I could think of was I'd be in 7th grade in September, and I was growing up. My mind knew it, even if my body didn't. The party in the gym was a lot like Thanksgiving square dance. Mrs. Wheeler and Mrs. Fishbein were chaperones, but this time they were dressed in regular clothes. Our class presented Mr. Bennett with a pair of silver cufflinks that Gretchen's mother had gotten wholesale. He seemed very pleased because he cleared his throat a lot, sounded like he didn't know what to say except thank you. And that although we hadn't started out to the greatest sixth grade in the world, we'd come a long way. And thanks to us, next year he'd be an experienced teacher, very experienced. Then we all laughed and some of the girls cried, but I didn't. Nancy, Gretchen, Janie, and I had lunch downtown by ourselves and talked about how it would feel to go to junior high. Janie was afraid she wouldn't be able to find her way around and she'd get lost. Gretchen said probably the teachers would all be mean, and Nancy said suppose we weren't in any classes together, and then we all went home and cried. Later that day, my mother started packing up my camp trunk. I watched her put my stacks of shorts and polos into it. Then I heard the lawnmower. Moose was back. First I got excited about seeing him, and then I got mad thinking about Laura and those stories he helped spread around. I ran downstairs and outside and yelled, "Hey, Moose!" He didn't hear me because the mower made too much noise. So I ran over to where he was cutting, and I stood right in his way so he'd have to notice me, and I shouted again, "Hey, Moose!" He shut off the mower. "You're in my way," he said. "I want to tell you something," I said. "Go ahead." I put my hands on my hips. "You know what, Moose? You're a liar. I don't believe you've ever took Laura Danker behind the A&P. Who said I did?" "What do you mean, who said it?" "Well, who? Nancy told me that Evan told her and that you and Evan—" I stopped. I sounded like an idiot. Moose shook his head at me. "You've always believed everything you hear about other people," he asked. "You always believe everything you hear about other people?" he asked. I didn't know what to say. Moose kept talking. "Well, next time, don't believe it unless you see it. Now, that's a good lesson. Now, if you'll move out of my way, I've got things to do." I didn't move. "You know what, Moose?" I asked. "What now?" "I'm sorry I thought you were a liar." "You know what, Margaret?" Moose asked me. "Know what?" "You're still in my way." I jumped away and Moose turned the mower on again. I heard him singing his favorite song about the Erie Canal. I went back into the house. I had to go to the bathroom. I was thinking about Moose and about how I liked to stand close to him. I was thinking that I was glad he wasn't a liar, and I was happy that he cut our grass. Then I looked down at my underpants and I couldn't believe it. There was blood on them. Not a lot, but enough. I really hollered, "Mom! Hey, Mom, come quick!" When my mother got to the bathroom, she said, "What is it? What's the matter?" "I got it," I told her. "Got what?" I started to laugh and cry at the same time. "My period! I got my period!" My nose started running, and I reached for a tissue. "Are you sure, Margaret?" my mother asked. Look at this," I said, showing her my underpants. "My God, you really got it. My little girl." Then her eyes filled up, and she started sniffling too. "Wait a minute. I've got the equipment in the other room. I was going to put it in your camp trunk just in case." "You were?" "Yes, just in case." She left the bathroom. When she came back, I asked her, "Is this that private lady stuff?" "No, I got you teenage softies." "Good," I said. "Now look, Margaret. Here's how you do it. The pad fits inside your panties and—" "Mom," I said, "I've been practicing in my room for 2 months." Then my mother and I laughed together, and she said, "In that case, I guess I'll wait in the other room." I locked the bathroom door and peeled the paper off the bottom of the pad. I pressed the sticky strip against my underpants. Then I got dressed and looked at myself in the mirror. Would anyone know my secret? Would it show? Would Moose, for instance, know if I went back outside to talk to him? Would my father know it right away when he came home for dinner? I had to call Nancy and Gretchen and Janie right away. Poor Janie, she'd be the last PTS to get it, and I'd been so sure it would be me. How about that? Now I'm growing for sure. Now I'm almost a woman. Are you still there, God? It's me, Margaret. I know you're there, God. I know you wouldn't have missed this for anything. Thank you, God. Thanks an awful lot. And that's the end of Are You There, God? It's me, Margaret. If you enjoyed this book, I suggest you look at other Judy Blume books. Here's some I recommend on my bookmark. There is Blubber. There is Deanie. There is Izzy's House. There is It's Not the End of the World. Also, there's Then Again, Maybe I Won't. And there's also starring Sally J. Friedman as herself. And then there is Freckle Juice, which is a very easy read. You could probably read in one day because it's more of a third, fourth grade book. But the rest of them will take you a little while. And congratulations on your first Judy B. June book, or maybe your second. And have fun in enjoying your Judy Blume books. I think they're a great, great selection for girls. And have fun reading. See you next time for my new book. Probably going to start reading Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.